The walls of the prison facility were cold and uninviting, built from a metal that seemed to absorb the faint light from the overhead lamps. The air felt heavy, filled with the silence that only the deepest dungeons could bring. Alien guards stood in strict formation, their glowing eyes scanning every corner of the room as they prepared for their queen's arrival. The queen walked through the halls with authority, her dark, regal cloak sweeping behind her like a shadow. She was known across the galaxy for her strength and intelligence. Few dared to challenge her, for her rule was absolute. Yet today, something unusual was happening. The guards had gathered around, whispering in hushed tones, and their eyes kept darting to the cells on either side. Why are they whispering, the queen thought. Her sharp senses had always been reliable, but today something felt different. Her mind raced as she reached the cell block. Inside one of the cells, a human was, shackled to the cold floor. His features were hidden in the shadows, but there was something oddly familiar about him. His posture was straight, even though he had clearly been through much. He was battered and bruised, but his eyes, those eyes, were what caught the queen's attention. She stopped before the cell, her eyes narrowing. There was no mistaking them. They were the same eyes she had seen years ago during an encounter on a far-off human colony. She had never forgotten them. Back then, the human had been calm, confident, and unlike any other she had met. He had been part of a peace negotiation, and though their time together had been brief, there had been something about him that had stayed with her. She had wondered in the back of her mind what had happened to him. And now here he was. The queen took a step closer to the bars, her heart betraying no emotion, but her mind filled with questions. How had he ended up in her prison? Why was he here of all places? The human lifted his head slowly, meeting her gaze. He didn't flinch. His eyes were just as she remembered, piercing, determined, and strangely calm despite the situation he found himself in. It was almost as if he had been expecting her. The queen felt a strange stir inside her. She had never felt this way before. No one could remain so composed in such a situation, especially not someone as weak and frail as a human. "Who are you?" the queen asked, her voice cold and commanding. She didn't need to introduce herself. Everyone knew who she was. The human did not speak at first. He simply stared at her, a faint smirk playing on his lips as if amused by the irony of their meeting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said in a voice that was calm, steady, and almost teasing. "I'm disappointed, Your Majesty." The queen's brow furrowed. He spoke as if he had every right to address her this way, and it made her pause. There was something in the way he said it that made her wonder if he was not just a prisoner, but someone who held a deeper significance than she had originally realized. "I don't forget faces," the queen said, though she knew there was a doubt in her words. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, not even to this human. The prisoner leaned forward slightly, his shackles rattling against the stone floor. His face was still partially obscured by the shadows, but the queen could see the glint of recognition in his eyes. His lips curled into a small smile as though he were savoring the moment. "Perhaps you should," he said. "The last time we met, you didn't even look at me twice. But I remember you. I remember the way you looked at me when you thought I wasn't paying attention." The queen felt a flicker of discomfort, something she hadn't felt in years. Her grip on her emotions tightened and she leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" The human shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You'll remember eventually. It's not like we'll be talking about old times for long." The queen's mind raced. How could she have forgotten someone like him? He was human, insignificant in the grand scheme of her empire. Yet there was a connection, something she couldn't explain. It had been years, but the memory of their brief encounter lingered in her mind. She had only seen him for a few moments, but something about those moments stuck with her. She had seen the fire in his eyes, his unyielding spirit. And now, here, he was a prisoner in her empire, staring back at her as though he had all the answers to questions she hadn't even asked. "Why are you here?" the Queen demanded, her voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the tension that hung between them. The human leaned back against the stone wall, unbothered by the question. Well, that's a story for another time, isn't it? The Queen's mind reeled. She had never been one to let things go, and this human had sparked something in her. She couldn't ignore him, couldn't let him fade into the background of her kingdom like so many others. She had to know more. Come with me, she said, her tone softening. We have much to discuss. The Queen led the prisoner through the palace corridors, her steps echoing off the stone walls. The air was thick with tension, yet there was an odd sense of familiarity between them, one that neither could fully understand. The human followed, his chains still rattling with each movement, but there was no sign of fear in his posture. He walked with the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose. The Queen's mind buzzed with questions. How had he ended up here? Why was he so calm in the face of imprisonment? It was almost as though he had been expecting this moment. Her thoughts wandered back to their first meeting. She had tried to dismiss it as just another diplomatic mission, another brief encounter with a species she barely knew. But now, in the quiet of the palace, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there had been more to it. She led him into a spacious room, her private chambers. The soft glow of the lamps cast long shadows on the walls, and the faint scent of incense lingered in the air. The room was simple, but elegant, a reflection of her taste and authority. She motioned for the human to sit on one of the chairs near the center of the room. He did so without hesitation, his chains scraping against the floor. Sit, she ordered, her voice steady. Tell me everything. The prisoner didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back, looking around, the room as if he were taking in every detail. The Queen crossed her arms and waited, not sure what she was expecting, but unwilling to give him any room to manipulate the situation. After a long pause, the human spoke. You're still the same, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. Cold, calculating. But there's something different about you now, I can feel it. The Queen's eyes narrowed. And what do you mean by that? He chuckled softly, the sound almost amused. You don't remember, do you? The last time we met, you looked at me like I was just another diplomat. But there was something in your eyes, something you tried to hide. The Queen didn't speak at first. His words struck a chord deep inside her, a feeling she had buried long ago. She remembered that moment. It had been during a trade negotiation on a human colony, a place she had never intended to visit again. He had been there, working as a liaison between the human government and hers. Their conversation had been brief, but she had felt something, a strange connection. He had a way of seeing through her, of looking past her power and authority, and it made her uncomfortable. But she had dismissed it, chalking it up to a fleeting encounter. What do you want from me? The Queen finally asked, her voice tinged with impatience. The prisoner leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. It's not what I want from you, Your Majesty. It's what you want from yourself. You've spent your entire life hiding behind that mask of power, but I see the cracks. You're not the person you pretend to be. The Queen's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever dared speak to her like this. She was the Queen, the ruler of an empire that spanned across galaxies. Her word was law, and her reputation was one of unyielding strength. Yet here was this human, a prisoner no less, challenging her with nothing more than words. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain control. You know nothing about me, he smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. I know more than you think. I know that you've always been afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of showing weakness, but I also know that you've been searching for something. You've been looking for a way out of this life you've built, but you don't know how to take the first step. The Queen's mind raced. Could he really see through her like that? It was unsettling, and she hated how he made her feel. For the first time in years, she felt as if she were no longer in control. But she couldn't show weakness. Not now. You think you know me? She asked, her voice hard. What do you know of my life, of the responsibilities I carry? The prisoner didn't flinch. I know that power isn't everything. You've spent so long conquering worlds, but what have you gained in the end? You've lost yourself in the process. You're not just a queen, you're a person. A person with feelings, desires, regrets. I saw it in your eyes the first time we met. The queen felt a knot tighten in her chest. She wanted to lash out, to tell him that he was wrong. But there was a part of her that couldn't deny the truth, in his words. It was as if he had uncovered something buried deep within her, something she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. "You're wrong," she said quietly, though her voice lacked the conviction she had hoped for. "I am who I've always been." The human shook his head. "No, you're not. You're just afraid to admit it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them grew heavy, almost suffocating. The queen's thoughts were a whirlwind, torn between the reality of her position and the unsettling feeling that this human, this prisoner, had somehow uncovered a part of her she had tried to bury. She had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to question the choices she had made. Yet now, with him sitting across from her, it seemed impossible to ignore the doubt that had begun to take root. "You're a prisoner," she finally said, her voice steady once more. "And you'll remain one, unless you tell me what I need to know." The prisoner leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "What if what you need to know is something you're not? Ready to hear?" The queen's eyes narrowed. "You're playing a dangerous game, human." His smile widened. "I've never been afraid of danger." She stood up, her cloak flowing behind her like a storm. She had to regain control, to remind him who she was. But a small part of her wondered, what if he was right? What if she had been hiding from something inside herself all these years? As the queen turned to leave, she felt his gaze follow her, unwavering. She had never felt so uncertain, and for the first time in her life, that uncertainty was more terrifying than anything else. The queen paced around her chambers, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She could feel the prisoner's words echoing in her mind, haunting her. "You've been searching for something," he had said. "You're not just a queen, you're a person." She had told herself that she was in control, that she had everything under her command, but now, in the silence of the room, it felt as if the walls were closing in. The prisoner's gaze had never wavered from her. His calm, steady presence was a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside her. How had he managed to get under her skin so easily? How had he seen through her so clearly, so quickly? She stopped pacing and turned to face him. He was still seated, in the chair, his chains rattling as he shifted, but there was no fear in his eyes. He sat with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he wanted. The queen hated that. She hated the fact that he had something she couldn't control. "You've been quiet," the queen said, her voice cool, though there was a hint of tension in her words. "I thought you'd be eager to speak." The prisoner didn't respond, immediately. Instead, he simply looked at her as if weighing his words carefully. "I've said what needed to be said," he finally replied. "Now it's your turn. Tell me, what do you really want?" The queen's brow furrowed. She wasn't used to being asked such a question. She had always been the one in control, the one who gave orders. No one had ever dared to ask her what she truly wanted. It felt foreign to her, unsettling even. But deep down, she knew he was right. There was more to this encounter than just his capture. She had invited him into her chambers not just to interrogate him, but to understand him, to understand herself. "What I want," she repeated, almost to herself. She crossed the room to the large window that overlooked the sprawling city below. The lights of the palace reflected off the dark waters of the river that snaked through the city like a silver thread. The view was breathtaking, but tonight it felt empty, as if the city itself were distant, uncaring. "I want power," she said at last, her voice quiet. "I want control over my empire. I want to ensure the survival of my people, and I want to be remembered." The prisoner's voice cut through the silence. "Is that all? Power? Control?" Those are things that anyone can take. But they don't make you who you are. They don't give you peace. She turned to face him, her gaze sharp. Peace? You think peace is what I need? Not peace, he said, shaking his head. Understanding, the kind that comes when you stop hiding from who you are. The queen clenched her fists, trying to ignore the feeling of unease creeping into her chest. She was the queen. She was the one who decided what happened in her empire. But the prisoner's words continued to weigh on her. Understanding. Was that what she needed? She had spent so many years building her empire, fighting wars, making enemies. She had never allowed herself the luxury of introspection, to question her actions, to question herself. I don't need your advice, she snapped, trying to regain her composure. I've made my decisions. I have sacrificed everything for my people, for my empire. The prisoner's expression softened. I never said, you hadn't, but sacrifice alone doesn't make you a ruler. It makes you a prisoner of your own choices. You've built walls around yourself, and now you're trapped behind them. His words struck her like a blow. She could feel the walls, the barriers she had built over the years. They were real, yet invisible, each one crafted from duty, fear, and pride. She had built them to protect herself, to keep others out. But now for the first time she saw them for what they truly were, prisons of her own making. What are you trying to say? She demanded, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. I'm saying, he began, his voice low and steady, that you don't have to be what you've always been. You don't have to keep running from the truth. You're more than just a queen. You're a person with desires, regrets, and dreams, and you're not alone. The queen felt her heart beat faster. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared. But for the first time she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the prisoner was right. Could it be that she had been hiding from herself all this time? Could it be that her obsession with power, control, and survival had blinded her to something more important? I've built an empire, she said slowly, her voice shaking slightly. An empire that stretches across galaxies. People depend on me, on my strength. I can't just walk away from that. You don't have to walk away, the prisoner said, his voice filled with conviction. But maybe it's time to stop building walls. Maybe it's time to let someone in. The queen felt a flicker of something deep inside her. It was fear, but it was also something else. Something she couldn't quite name. She had always been in control, always the one holding the power. But now, in the presence of this human prisoner, she felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. She turned away, trying to mask the sudden rush of emotions. Her gaze fell on the stars outside the window. The vastness of space seemed to stretch out endlessly, full of possibilities. But what did those possibilities mean for her? What was the next step? I didn't bring you here to discuss my feelings, the queen said, her voice colder now. I brought you here to find out what you know, about my empire, about the dangers that threaten it. The prisoner nodded as if he had expected her to change the subject. I know more than you think, he said, and I can help you, but it won't come without a price. She looked at him then, her eyes narrowing. A price? He leaned forward slightly, his chains rattling. Yes, you'll have to trust me. You'll have to let go of the fear that's been holding you back. The queen stood in silence, her mind racing. She had never trusted anyone, not even herself at times. But could she trust him? Could she afford not to? The queen stood still for a moment, the prisoner's words hanging in the air like a weight she couldn't shake. Trust. It was a foreign concept to her, something she had long buried under the demands of ruling an empire. For years, she had relied only on her own strength and decisions. But now, with the prisoner sitting before her, offering to help, she felt something stir within her. A part of her that had been locked away for so long. She turned away, her gaze drifting to the window once more. The stars outside shimmered in the blackness of space, distant and cold. They had always been a symbol of the vast empire she had built, but tonight, they seemed a reminder of everything she had sacrificed. And now, for the first time, She questioned whether it had all been worth it. The prisoner watched her from his chair, his calm demeanor never faltering. He had a way of making her feel both uneasy and strangely seen. He had no fear in his eyes, no judgment, just understanding. She had never experienced that before, especially not from someone like him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "You want me to trust you," she said, her voice low. "But trust doesn't come easily. I've been betrayed before. I've had people who said they would help, only to use me for their own gain." The prisoner nodded, acknowledging her words. "I understand, but I'm not here to use you. I'm here because I believe that together we can change things, but only if you're willing to let go of the fear that holds you back." The Queen's heart thudded in her chest. Fear. It was something she had never allowed herself to feel, at least not openly. She had buried it deep, hidden it behind walls of steel and stone. But as she stood there facing the prisoner, she felt a crack in those walls. "I've been alone for so long," she whispered, almost to herself. "I've trusted no one because I couldn't afford to. The weight of the empire, the lives of my people, they all depend on me. I can't let anyone else in. I can't risk it." The prisoner leaned forward slightly, his eyes softening. "You don't have to carry it alone. No one can. You don't have to be perfect, Your Majesty. You just have to be real. And sometimes that means letting someone help you." The Queen's chest tightened, and for a moment she felt the full weight of the loneliness that had been growing inside her. She had never realized how much she had been carrying until now. The thought of letting go of that burden, even for a moment, was terrifying, but there was something in the prisoner's voice, something in the way he spoke, that made her wonder if it was possible. "I don't know how to let go," she admitted, her voice breaking the silence. "I don't know how to trust anyone, not after everything I've been through." The prisoner stood up then, his chains rattling as he approached her. He stopped just a few feet away, watching her carefully. "You don't have to trust me right away, but maybe you can start by trusting yourself. Trust that you deserve to be happy, to be at peace." The Queen's heart skipped a beat. Peace. It was something she had never allowed herself to consider. She had always been focused on the empire, the power, the legacy she was building. But what was the point of it all if she couldn't find peace within herself? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've never known peace," she said quietly. "Not since the day I took the throne." The prisoner's expression softened. "Maybe it's time to find it. Maybe it's time to put down the armor, even just for a moment, and allow yourself to breathe." The Queen's hands clenched at her sides, her mind whirling. She had spent so many years holding herself together, never allowing herself to break. She had convinced herself that showing any weakness would be her downfall. But here, with the prisoner standing before her, she felt the cracks beginning to show. "Do you think I can find peace?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Prisoner's eyes locked onto hers. "I think you already have it inside you. You just need to let it out." For the first time in years, the Queen felt a flicker of hope. It was a small thing, a fragile thing, but it was there. She had never thought that anyone, especially a prisoner, could make her feel this way. But in that moment, she realized that she was no longer just a ruler. She was a person with emotions, with needs, and with the capacity to change. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her heart raced, her breath quickened. She had never been this close to anyone. Not since her childhood. She had always kept everyone at arm's length, always kept them beneath her. But now, as she stood before this man, she felt something shift inside her. The prisoner didn't move. He simply stood there, allowing her the space to make her decision. He was giving her a choice. The choice to open up, to let go, to trust. The Queen's mind raced. She had always believed that she was strong because she never let anyone in. But now, as she stood before this man, she realized that true strength wasn't about keeping everyone out. True strength was about being able to let someone else in, to share the weight of the world with someone who cared. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the Queen reached out and placed a hand on the prisoner's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to her than she could express. It was the first step toward something new, a step toward trust, a step toward peace. "I don't know where this will lead," she said softly, her voice full of uncertainty. "But I want to try." The prisoner's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw something in him that wasn't just calm or distant. It was warmth, understanding, and for a moment she felt like she wasn't alone anymore. "I'll be here," he said quietly. "Whenever you're ready." The queen sat at her desk, the weight of the empire pressing down on her. The soft hum of the palace around her felt distant, as if the world were slowly fading into the background. Her thoughts were consumed with the prisoner's words, his promise that peace was within her reach. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. Was it possible? Could she truly let go of her walls and embrace something different? Something more? But reality tugged at her. She was still the queen. She still held the power of an empire in her hands, and that power demanded more than self-reflection. It demanded decisions, cold and calculated choices that could alter the course of entire worlds. It demanded sacrifices, and sometimes those sacrifices were more than she was willing to make. She glanced out the window, her eyes tracing the lights of the city below. The palace was quiet tonight, but the weight of the political tensions outside never went away. Her enemies were growing stronger. Rebellions were stirring in the outer colonies, and there were whispers of betrayal among her own council. The prisoners. Words echoed again in her mind. "You don't have to carry it alone." She pushed them away. She couldn't afford to listen to him. Not now. She couldn't afford weakness. Not in the middle of this struggle. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. Without waiting for a response, the door opened, and one of her most trusted advisors, Commander Varric, stepped inside. His dark eyes were serious, his posture rigid. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice low and respectful. "There's a situation in the eastern sector. We've received intelligence that the rebellion has gained significant ground. They're planning a full-scale attack on the supply routes. We need to act quickly." The queen nodded, her mind already racing. The rebellion had been growing stronger, but this was the first time they had made a move that serious. She had anticipated a threat, but this felt different. Varric was right. They needed to respond immediately. "I'll have the fleet prepared for deployment," she said, her voice firm. Varric hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Your Majesty, there's more. A human force is also involved. We've been tracking their movements for weeks. They may have an alliance with the rebels." At the mention of humans, the queen's thoughts flickered back to the prisoner. She hadn't spoken to him since their last conversation, but the image of his calm face, his knowing eyes, haunted her. What did he know about this? Was he involved in all of this? Could he be? She forced herself to focus. She couldn't let her personal thoughts interfere with the situation at hand. The Empire needed her to be decisive. Her people needed her to act. And that meant doing whatever was necessary to protect them. "Find out everything you can about the human force. I'll make the necessary arrangements," the queen said, her voice steady. Varric gave a sharp nod. "As you wish, Your Majesty." He left the room, leaving the queen alone with her thoughts once again. The room felt colder now, the silence pressing in on her. She walked over to the table where her battle plans were laid out, the maps of the Empire's territories scattered across the surface. She traced a finger over the lines marking the supply routes. Each one represented a vital lifeline to her people, each one a target the rebels were determined to destroy. Her mind drifted back to the prisoner. She couldn't shake the feeling that his presence here was no accident. There was a connection between him and this rebellion. He had known more than he had let on. But what was his role in all of this? Was he truly just a prisoner? Or had he come here for a reason? She turned toward the door, her mind made up. She needed answers. The prisoner was in his cell, just as he had been for days. The guards stood at their posts, their expressions neutral, but the queen knew that they were more than just soldiers. They were watching her, They had seen her speak with him before. They would be watching again, but she didn't care. She needed to speak to him. It was time to get to the bottom of this. She approached the cell, her footsteps soft but determined. The prisoner looked up at her as she arrived, his expression unchanged. He had been waiting for her. "I need answers," the Queen said, her voice low but firm. "You know something about the rebellion, about the humans involved. I need to know everything." The prisoner studied her for a moment before responding. "You already know more than you think," he said quietly. The Queen's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You've been playing the game for so long," the prisoner continued, his voice calm. "You've built an empire, a kingdom of power, and you've always played by the rules. But sometimes the rules change. Sometimes the game isn't just about winning. Sometimes it's about choosing what you're willing to sacrifice." The Queen felt a flicker of uncertainty, but she pushed it down. She had no time for philosophical discussions. "What is it you want from me?" "Nothing," he replied simply. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to help you see the bigger picture. The rebellion isn't just about territory or power. It's about something much deeper, something you're afraid to face." She clenched her fists, trying to contain the surge of anger that rose within her. "I don't need your help." "You do," the prisoner said, his voice calm, but insistent. "You can win this war, but you'll have to make a choice. You'll have to choose whether you want to be the ruler of an empire or the person who saved it." The Queen's heart raced. The choice was hers. She had always believed that her duty was to protect the empire, no matter the cost. But now, with the prisoner's words hanging in the air, she felt the weight of that duty in a way she never had before. She could continue down the path she had always walked, ruthless and unyielding. Or she could choose something else, something that required more than strength, something that required trust. The decision was terrifying. The thought of letting go of control, of risking everything she had built, was unthinkable. But the prisoner was right. If she continued on this path, she might win the war, but she would lose everything else. She turned to leave the cell, her mind a whirlwind of uncertainty. She had made her choice, but now she had to live with the consequences. The Queen stood at the edge of the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Below her, the city stretched out like a glittering sea of lights. The empire was hers, but tonight, it felt like something more. Something fragile, something uncertain. The decision she had made the day before lingered in her mind, heavy and overwhelming. She had chosen to trust, to let someone else in. It had been the hardest choice of her life, but she couldn't deny it anymore. The prisoner had spoken the truth. Power alone wouldn't save her or her people. Only change could do that. Her thoughts turned to the rebellion. Intelligence reports confirmed the threat was growing, and the enemy was preparing for a full assault. The supply lines were about to be cut, and the empire would be crippled if they didn't act quickly. She had no time to second-guess herself. "Your Majesty," a voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Commander Varric approaching, his expression tense. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes filled with urgency. "Report," the Queen said, her tone sharp. "The rebels are closer than we anticipated," Varric said, his voice tight with stress. "We've received word that they've formed an alliance with a human faction. The attack could happen any moment. We need to strike first, or we'll lose everything." The Queen's chest tightened. The time had come. There was no turning back now. She had to act decisively, but there was something different in the way she approached this now. The weight of leadership still pressed heavily on her, but she had made a promise to herself. She would not lead with fear. She would lead with understanding. "I want to speak to the prisoner," she said suddenly, her voice steady. Varric's eyes widened. "The prisoner, Your Majesty. He's a—" "I know who he is," the Queen interrupted. "Bring him to me." Varric hesitated but then gave a stiff nod. "As you wish, Your Majesty." A few moments later, the Queen found herself standing before the prisoner once again. This time, however, something was different. She was no longer the ruler commanding a Niagara empire from a distance. She was someone who needed help, someone who had chosen to step into the unknown. The prisoner stood quietly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held that same steady calm she had grown to recognize. He did not speak immediately, but simply waited for her to find the words. "Tell me what you know about the rebellion," she said, her voice softer than before. The prisoner took a slow breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know you've already heard enough from your spies. What you need to understand is the bigger picture. The rebellion isn't just a military threat, it's a response to something deeper. The people are tired of being ruled with fear." She clenched her fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I've given everything to protect them. I've fought for this empire. Everything I've done has been for the people." "You've fought for them," the prisoner said, his voice low, "but not with them. There's a difference." The Queen swallowed hard, his words cutting deeper than she expected. "What do you suggest, then?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do I do? How do I save my empire?" The prisoner stepped forward, his chains still rattling with each movement. "You start by acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. You trust in the people and you stop trying to control everything." Her breath caught in her throat. "You want me to give up control?" "I want you to understand that control isn't the answer. It's about finding balance. Listening to your people, their needs and their fears. Once you do that, you'll have a true empire. One built on understanding, not fear." The Queen felt a pang in her chest. She had spent her whole life fighting for control, for dominance, thinking it was the only way to secure her people's future. But now, the prisoner's words felt like a challenge. Could she truly change? Could she lead with something other than fear? "I don't know how to do that," she whispered. "I've been so focused on protecting what I've built. I never stopped to ask myself what it means to really lead." The prisoner gave a small, almost sad smile. "It's never too late to change, to make the choice to lead with compassion, with empathy." She stood in silence, absorbing his words. She knew he was right. She had been so focused on holding power that she had forgotten the true meaning of leadership. It wasn't just about control, it was about guiding people through their struggles, helping them find a path forward together. "All right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "What do I need to do?" The prisoner's eyes softened. "There are two paths before you. You can continue down the road you've always known and crush the rebellion with force. You'll win, but at a cost. Your people will be broken and your empire will be hollow. Or you can offer them a chance to work with you, to find peace. It will take courage, and it will take sacrifice, but it's the only way to build something that lasts." The Queen took a deep breath. It was a dangerous choice. The rebels could refuse her offer. They might see it as a sign of weakness. But she knew, deep down, that it was the only way to move forward. If she didn't make this choice now, she would lose everything. She turned to Varric, who had been standing silently in the doorway, waiting for her decision. "Prepare a message for the rebellion leaders. Tell them that I am offering peace, but only if they are willing to negotiate." Varric's eyes widened with shock. "Your Majesty, are you sure? This could make us vulnerable. The Empire—" "I'm sure," she said, cutting him off. "It's time for a different path." As the Queen stood in the center of the room, her decision made, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, and the future was uncertain. But for the first time in years, she felt as though she was on the right path, a path that could save her empire, and perhaps save herself as well.